She's the only woman, as far as I know, if you look at the timeline, who gave birth and then subsequently went into labour later in the day.
Meghan at the Albert Hall. How many weeks pregnant was she supposed to be? Was it about 8 weeks? And she looks as if she's at least 5 months pregnant.
Is Buckingham Palace finally ready for a reckoning over the births of Meghan Markle's 2 children, Archie and Lily?
For years, discussions surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have sparked countless debates. But every so often, a familiar topic returns after someone unexpected weighs in. This time, the conversation has gained fresh attention because a respected royal historian publicly questioned parts of the timeline surrounding Archie's birth. His remarks have reignited an issue that many believed had already faded from the spotlight, largely because they came from someone widely regarded as a careful and measured voice, rather than someone known for making dramatic headlines. The person at the centre of this latest discussion is Hugo Vickers, a royal historian who has spent more than 4 decades researching and writing about the royal family.
She had to accept, that the things would be happening on a national level. And that's what the royal family has to accept as well. And most of them understand that. And so you make announcements. You tell people, the child's going to be born. You tell it where it's going to be born. You tell it when it was born. You show the child at a certain point. You tell us who the godparents are going to be. And we all enjoy this. And we're very much then, we, the general public, very much on the side of the person doing that and sort of enjoying it because they are a family at the centre of the nation. And that's all part of it. So to deny us that, I think, was sort of, kicking in causing trouble and showing she was going to do it her way. And that's when things began to go wrong.
Over the years, he has built a reputation through numerous books and public appearances, and he has also served in ceremonial roles connected with royal events at St. George's Chapel. Because of that background, many royal followers view his opinions as those of an established historian, rather than someone looking to create controversy. During a recent interview while discussing his latest book about Queen Elizabeth II, the conversation eventually shifted toward Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Although the interview was mainly focused on the late Queen and Vickers' decades of research, he briefly addressed the long-running questions that have surrounded the public timeline of Archie's birth. His comments immediately caught attention because he rarely speaks so openly about controversial royal topics. According to Vickers, parts of the publicly described timeline simply did not make sense to him. He remarked that the sequence of events appeared unusual and said he struggled to reconcile how everything was presented. One particular point he highlighted was the reported timing surrounding labour and the birth itself, explaining that based on the timeline that had been shared publicly, he found it difficult to understand how the events fit together. Rather than making firm accusations, he framed his remarks as questions that, in his view, had never been fully answered.
Do you remember Meghan actually refused to use the hospital that was usually used by royals and refused to use all of the normal medical staff, and there was all of the weirdness over the timing of the birth of Archie?
Vickers also pointed to several details that have been discussed for years by royal commentators. He noted that the identity of the obstetrician was never publicly confirmed, and he mentioned that Archie's godparents were likewise kept private. While many families choose to protect personal information, Vickers suggested that the overall level of privacy surrounding the event stood out because royal births have traditionally involved a greater degree of public transparency. In his opinion, it was the combination of those decisions, rather than any single detail, that continued to raise questions. These observations are not entirely new. Long before this interview, Lady Colin Campbell had repeatedly argued that aspects of the official timeline deserved closer examination. At the time, many critics dismissed her comments as simply another controversial opinion within royal circles. However, some commentators now believe Vickers' remarks have renewed interest because they come from someone with a very different public reputation. Even so, it's important to note that these remain opinions and interpretations rather than confirmed findings. Another reason this interview has generated so much discussion is that Vickers was not appearing to debate Archie at all. His primary purpose was to discuss his newly published biography of Queen Elizabeth II, a project built on decades of research and personal knowledge of the late monarch. Reviews praised the book for its historical detail, making his brief comments about the Sussexes stand out even more than they otherwise might have.
Why it was interesting to me is because, Hugo Vickers is a cautious guy. He's a guy who has very close connections to the royal family. And a lot of what he says, you have to read between the lines.
As the interview continued, viewers noticed that Vickers chose his words carefully. He stopped short of making definitive claims and instead focused on explaining why certain parts of the publicly available timeline continued to puzzle him. That distinction has become an important part of the discussion, with many people pointing out that asking questions is very different from presenting conclusions. Still, because of Vickers' long-standing reputation within royal history, even those measured observations have quickly become one of the most talked about royal stories in recent days.
Okay, let's do the godparents were, but I do think one ought to, why don't you just tell us, So you could see she was had her own agenda. But what I didn't think she would do is to, I never thought she'd stay, to be honest, but I never thought she'd do it in the reign of the Queen, but she was prepared to do that.
One of the more interesting parts of this story is that Hugo Vickers' remarks were not actually brand new. Similar observations had already appeared months earlier in a newspaper interview, but at the time they attracted very little attention. The comments were published, circulated, and then seemed to disappear without creating much discussion. It wasn't until they were highlighted again during a recent interview that royal watchers started revisiting them and asking why they had largely gone unnoticed the first time. That renewed attention has also brought focus back to the long-standing public record surrounding Archie's birth. For many royal historians, the discussion is less about speculation and more about how royal births have traditionally been documented. The question they raise is whether the usual procedures were followed in the same way they had been for previous generations of the royal family. One detail that continues to come up is the ceremonial notice displayed outside Buckingham Palace after the birth of a royal child. While many people see it as a symbolic announcement, historians point out that it has traditionally served a much bigger purpose. For decades, the framed notice placed on an easel outside the palace has acted as an official public record, confirming important details such as the time of birth, the location, and the medical professionals involved.
Again, I was at The Sun at the time, and I posed a whole load of questions to her team, her communications team, and it never made any sense. They lied. They lied about time. They lied about the location. It was so weird.
She gave birth to them, and she has quite deliberately caused doubt, and she has created mischief, knowing that it would damage the royal family, which would show a level of spite and malice that is truly not only sick, but evil.
That custom exists because of lessons learned centuries ago. Historical controversies surrounding royal succession led to greater emphasis on documenting royal births as clearly as possible. Over time, the process evolved into a well-established tradition designed to provide transparency and confidence in the official record. Although some parts of the tradition have changed over the years, the basic idea has remained remarkably consistent. When Prince George was born in 2013, the official announcement included the names of the attending doctors, all of whom were publicly known specialists. The same approach was followed when Princess Charlotte arrived in 2015, and again with Prince Louis in 2018. In each case, the palace confirmed the medical team in advance, and the doctors later appeared publicly as part of the well-documented royal tradition. Their involvement was never treated as confidential information. Archie's birth announcement, however, looked noticeably different. The notice included the time of birth, the baby's weight, and the hospital where the birth reportedly took place. But unlike previous royal birth announcements, it did not publicly identify the attending doctor.
All other royal babies in the line of succession have had their births signed off. Princess Eugenie, Princess Beatrice, Sarah York, Diana Wales, Catherine Wales, you name it. Everybody knows where the babies came from, at what time, with proof. The only two children that there is no proof for is Prince Archie Bunker and Princess Lily. You better hope that she's really entitled to what they claim she's entitled.
That single omission has continued to attract attention because it departed from what many royal observers had become accustomed to seeing. It's important to remember that hospitals are under no obligation to discuss private medical information. Patient confidentiality is a standard part of medical practice, and healthcare providers routinely decline to comment on individual cases. In that respect, there was nothing unusual about the hospital choosing not to provide additional details. The discussion instead centres on how the royal family has traditionally handled public announcements, rather than on the hospital's responsibilities. Because no medical professional was publicly identified, much of the publicly available information about that day has come from statements made by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle themselves. Some commentators have noted that there were very few independently confirmed details released at the time, while others argue that the couple simply exercised a greater level of privacy than previous generations of royals. As a result, opinions remain divided, and there is no universal agreement on whether those differences are significant. Another figure who has kept this discussion alive over the years is Lady Colin Campbell. Since 2020, she has regularly revisited the topic in videos and interviews, arguing that the official timeline still leaves unanswered questions. Her views have generated strong reactions, with some people agreeing that the documentation deserves closer examination and others believing the matter has already been explained as far as it reasonably can be.
I have spoken to doctors, nurses, many women who've given birth to children, and all of them say the same thing. Those photographs of Meghan and the way the baby bump performed are totally unexpected, and they're not aware of any pregnant woman who is genuinely pregnant having her bump perform the way Meghan's has performed.
Now that Hugo Vickers has publicly expressed similar concerns, while carefully presenting them as questions rather than conclusions, the conversation has taken on new momentum. Regardless of where people stand, many royal followers agree on one thing. The differences between Archie's official birth announcement and those of previous royal children continue to be discussed years after the event, keeping the debate firmly in the public eye. For years, Lady Colin Campbell has been one of the most recognisable voices questioning the publicly available timelines surrounding Archie's birth. Her commentary has appeared across books, interviews, and online discussions, making her one of the most persistent figures covering the topic. Because of her outspoken style, her opinions have often divided audiences. Some viewers believe she raises legitimate questions, while others feel her conclusions go too far. Regardless of where people stand, her views have remained part of the wider royal conversation for several years. What has changed recently is not that Lady Colin Campbell repeated those opinions, but that another well-known royal historian expressed similar concerns from a much more cautious perspective. Many commentators say that shift has attracted attention because Hugo Vickers has built his reputation differently. Throughout his career, he has generally been viewed as a traditional royal historian who carefully chooses his words and rarely steps into highly controversial debates.
And another thing that I know that they do, if a royal lady who's about to give birth, there's 2 phone calls that the security team makes. One to the palace to inform Her Majesty that, she's gone into labor. And 2, that to the security, the head of security, to secure the premises where they go. Harry claims that they didn't do any of that. That means that the Royal Police Protection Officers violated security protocol, which will be a first.
Shortly after Vickers' interview gained attention, Lady Colin Campbell also appeared in a separate interview discussing his remarks. Rather than immediately expanding on her own long-held arguments, she first acknowledged that someone with Vickers' background had now publicly questioned the same timeline. Observers noted that her response was noticeably more measured than usual, almost as though she recognised that the discussion had entered a different phase simply because another respected historian had decided to speak publicly. Many royal commentators have pointed out that the 2 figures approach these topics from very different directions. Lady Colin Campbell has spent years openly sharing her opinions, while Vickers has largely focused on documenting royal history through books and historical research. Because of those different reputations, some observers believe the overlap between their views has encouraged more people to revisit the discussion, even if neither has presented new documentary evidence beyond what is already publicly available. Even so, there remains an important distinction. Vickers limited his comments to saying that certain parts of the published timeline did not make sense to him and that aspects of the public record raised questions in his mind. He stopped short of making broader conclusions. Lady Colin Campbell, by contrast, has often used much stronger language when describing the controversy.
It's a matter of responsibility, and I suspect it's such a hot potato that I suspect the resolution will be down the line when Harry and those children will be removed entirely from various situations and positions. That, I think, is going to be the neatest, cleanest way of resolving something rather than any confirmation or expose.
That difference in tone has become one of the biggest talking points, with many viewers noting that while the two appear to share some concerns, they express them in very different ways. The renewed interest in Vickers' comments has also brought additional attention to his latest biography of Queen Elizabeth II. Drawing on decades of research and personal experience, the book explores many significant moments from the late Queen's reign, including the challenges she faced during her final years. Reviews have highlighted the sections discussing the relationship between Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and the wider royal family as some of the book's most widely discussed chapters. According to Vickers, the disagreements surrounding the Duke and Duchess of Sussex placed considerable strain on family relationships during Queen Elizabeth II's later years. He writes that the ongoing tensions became one of the defining personal challenges of her final period on the throne. Those observations have been widely quoted since the book's release, particularly because they come from someone who spent decades studying the monarchy and had opportunities to observe royal life over many years. Several publications have also focused on these sections of the biography, describing them as among the book's most revealing passages. Rather than relying on sensational language, Vickers presents his perspective through historical context and his own experiences covering the royal family across multiple decades. That measured approach has contributed to the book receiving significant attention from readers interested in modern royal history.
And Hugo is impeccably well connected. And Hugo, unlike me, because you see, Hugo can be chucked out because Hugo's position, so to speak, is entirely related to his royal connections and his social connections in this country. While, of course, mine aren't. I mean, if I were excluded as a part of the British establishment, I simply have the American and the Jamaican and the international to fall back on. Hugo has none of that. So Hugo is extremely cautious. Hugo, which I am not. I don't need to.
As the discussion continues, many royal watchers emphasise that Vickers' comments should be understood as his personal assessment, based on publicly available information and his years of experience, not as definitive proof of any particular claim. Even so, his decision to publicly question parts of the timeline has undoubtedly reignited a debate that had been simmering for years. Whether that conversation leads to any new information remains uncertain, but it has once again placed the Sussexes at the centre of one of the royal family's most closely followed public discussions. Another part of Hugo Vickers' interview that quickly caught people's attention had nothing to do with Archie's birth at all. Instead, it focused on a passage from his new biography about Queen Elizabeth II. During the discussion, Vickers referred to a private conversation that he says took place with the late Queen, sharing a brief description that has since become one of the most quoted lines from the book.
It's absolutely unbelievable that any member of the royal family could have set about creating what is an international scandal where people have the means as a result of her and her husband's conduct to question whether they have perpetrated the scam of the century upon not only the royal family and the British people, but the other realms of which any heir to the throne is heir to that throne as well.
According to Vickers, Queen Elizabeth II privately remarked that Prince Harry had, in many ways, become a caregiver for Archie. The wording itself is simple, but because it is attributed to the late Queen in an extensively researched biography, it has attracted considerable interest among royal followers. As with other personal recollections included in historical biographies, readers can only evaluate the account based on the author's reporting and the editorial standards behind the publication. Many commentators have pointed out that Vickers is known for using measured language rather than dramatic headlines. Throughout his career, he has generally avoided making sweeping statements, instead presenting information carefully and allowing readers to form their own conclusions. That writing style has become one of the reasons his latest book has received so much attention from those who closely follow royal history. The biography itself explores a much broader story than the recent headlines suggest. Alongside historical events from Queen Elizabeth II's reign, Vickers examines the personal challenges the royal family experienced during her final years. Several chapters discuss the changing relationship between Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and the rest of the family, describing how those tensions reportedly affected the late monarch. Those sections have become some of the most frequently discussed parts of the book since its release. At the same time, Vickers' recent interview has changed the way many people view the ongoing conversation surrounding Archie's birth timeline. For years, discussions on the subject were largely associated with a relatively small group of royal commentators who repeatedly questioned aspects of the publicly available record.
And now Harry has opted out. And for what? To be a carer for Archie. So it sounds like she had almost a bit of a premonition that this life in California wasn't going to work out for her grandpa.
Supporters believed those questions deserved further examination, while critics often dismissed the topic altogether. Now some royal observers believe the discussion has entered a different stage, not because new evidence has emerged, but because someone with Vickers' reputation has publicly acknowledged that he also finds parts of the timeline difficult to reconcile. Whether people ultimately agree with his perspective or not, many commentators say his involvement has encouraged a wider audience to revisit a debate that had previously remained on the sidelines. It's also worth noting that the underlying discussion has not fundamentally changed. The questions being raised today are largely the same ones that have circulated for several years. What has changed is the level of public attention they are receiving. As more established historians and royal authors comment on the topic, it naturally attracts greater interest from readers, viewers, and members of the media. Even so, much of the conversation still revolves around the same publicly available documents that have existed since 2019. One detail frequently mentioned is the official birth announcement displayed outside Buckingham Palace. While it included information such as the time of birth, the baby's weight, and the reported hospital, some commentators continue to note that it differed from previous royal announcements in certain respects. Others argue those differences simply reflected the Sussexes' preference for greater privacy. For now, there has been no official indication that the historical record will be revised or expanded. Buckingham Palace has not reopened the discussion, and no new public documentation has been released. As a result, the debate continues to rely on interpretations of information that has been available for years, rather than on newly confirmed facts. Whether this renewed attention eventually leads to further clarification remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that Hugo Vickers' comments have brought fresh focus to a long-running royal discussion, ensuring that a topic many believed had faded away is once again being closely followed by royal watchers around the world.
And also, why is the belly several shades browner than anywhere else? It's not supposed to be brown.
Did you think it was a parody? Because I thought that this was AI. I thought this cannot be real.
The reason I didn't think it was AI is because it looks like the stomach is fake, where the baby, I swear that's the first thing I...
As the discussion continues, much of the attention remains focused on documents that have been publicly available for years. One frequently mentioned record is the amendment made to Archie's birth certificate in June 2019, along with later public statements explaining why that amendment took place. Those documents remain part of the public record, and they continue to be referenced by commentators whenever this topic returns to the headlines. Supporters of different viewpoints interpret those records in very different ways. Some believe they raise questions that deserve further explanation, while others argue that the available information is sufficient and that no further conclusions should be drawn. At this stage, there has been no official announcement introducing new evidence that fundamentally changes what is already publicly known. What has changed, however, is the level of attention the discussion is receiving. For several years, conversations about Archie's birth timeline were largely limited to online commentators and niche royal discussions. Now, after Hugo Vickers publicly shared his perspective during a recent interview and following the release of his biography of Queen Elizabeth II, the topic has reached a much broader audience. Whether viewers agree with his assessment or not, many acknowledge that his reputation has brought fresh interest to a debate that had been relatively quiet. Several royal experts are also watching closely to see whether other historians or established authors decide to address the same subject. New books covering the modern royal family continue to be published, and readers are naturally interested in whether future releases will offer additional context, different interpretations, or entirely new information. Until then, much of the conversation remains centered on examining the same publicly available records from different perspectives. For now, there are still far more questions than confirmed answers. Some royal watchers believe the discussion will gradually fade once again, while others think it could continue if more historians decide to comment publicly. As with many stories involving the royal family, opinions remain deeply divided, and it's likely that debate will continue for quite some time. One thing is certain, this story demonstrates how public conversations can evolve over time. A topic that once appeared to interest only a small group of commentators is now being discussed by respected historians, major publications, and royal observers across the world. Whether that ultimately changes the wider public understanding remains to be seen, but it shows how discussions can grow as more voices join in. As always, it's worth remembering that separating confirmed facts from opinions, interpretations, and speculation is essential whenever following stories like this. New interviews and books can certainly add perspective, but they don't automatically settle long-running debates. That's why many people continue to follow these developments with interest while waiting to see whether any additional verified information becomes available in the future. Now, we'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think Hugo Vickers' comments will lead to a wider discussion among royal historians? Or do you believe this conversation will eventually quiet down again? Share your opinion in the comments below. We always enjoy seeing the different perspectives our viewers bring to these stories. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who follows the royal family, and subscribe so you don't miss future updates on the biggest celebrity and royal headlines. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Before you go, check out the video that's appearing on your screen now for even more celebrity drama, royal news, and the stories everyone will be talking about next.